Before we begin, we dedicate this call to the spirit of helping your neighbor, which is what happened during the fire, on the day of the fire, and after the fire, and all of you who are showing up here to help with the recovery and rebuild. So that's our dedication. And to do that, we also want to represent a fire-affected person on every call. And Michaela is going to talk about that.
Yeah, I've been speaking to a few fire-affected individuals, and today I'll be sharing a story from Shauna Huggins of her experience 2 weeks after the fire. She wrote this and gave me permission to read her story. An essay I wrote 2 weeks after the fire, trying to process it all 2 weeks later. I have been back to my neighborhood 3 times now. It is truly a miracle, a gift that all my neighbors made it out of the park alive. The monster that was coming was relentless, unstoppable, and horrific. We had no notice. We had one exit. Many of my neighbors were home without cars. It was only because of the love and thoughtfulness of many that everyone made it out. Community, love, caring. That was Pacific Village. We were family. We knew the vulnerable among us and took care of them. We took care of one another, and not just on September 8th, but year-round. I was so amazingly proud of my community. I'm also deeply saddened that we are now all dispersed. Love is what matters, community is what matters, and caring is what matters. All the rest of life's noise is just distraction. Cherish those around you and your community. Kindness, thoughtfulness, cheer. A pat on the back and a kind ear. An encouraging word. This builds community. Our beautiful children taking advantage of the road closures due to repavement. We had joyful, loving community. A photo of what is left. I miss these joyful faces. So heartbreaking. 2 years ago, I had painted enough rocks to put 2 in the yards of all 82 homes. I had written Pacific Village 2018 and painted a large red heart on the back. My neighbors found some of the rocks among the ashes, the only survivors of the fire.
Wow. That's really moving and motivating, I think, for all of us to want to rebuild affordably and equitably for everyone who lost so much in the fire. So we're going to begin our what is a housing cooperative, and really it should be titled What are Housing Cooperatives and Community Land Trusts? And we have an amazing expert on this. Sandy Bishop has been doing this for, I think it's over 30 years, at least 22 years actively as a project manager. She runs the Lopez Community Land Trust in Washington with over 100 acres, 7 neighborhoods, historic farmland, gardens, and community center. This is really a miracle of manifestation. She knows how to create affordable housing, how to create net zero housing, how to love and care for your neighbors, create community, and preserve land in a sustainable, ecological way. So we're completely thrilled to have such a pioneer and an expert speak to us on this topic. Sandy Bishop.
Thank you. So thank you, Caden and Karen and Michaela. We've been chatting a little bit before this started, and you know, I followed when the fires were happening, and I just have to say it was devastating from afar, and I just send my heartfelt thanks that all of you that survived did survive. And I can't quite imagine the trauma that you are experiencing through the 4 cities and the county. And yeah, I hope today can offer, you know, just a small offering not just of comfort, but also of maybe some possibilities of what can happen. One thing that I'm aware of, and that for the last 32 years that has motivated some of our development on Lopez Island, is climate disruption. We understand it to be a major force in our lives, and not really knowing how it's going to manifest. I know that, you know, when fire rages through, it happens, well, in your case, you know, it happened, you didn't even have any warning. Climate, we've been having some warning about. But I think one thing I want to say today is that really this is about land, land, land. I just really can't stress that enough. Things will happen in our lives, in our communities, but if we can always return to the land will help to support us and heal us. It's one thing to lose everything, but when you also lose the land that you had your home on, I think that can be damaging, not just for you, but for many generations to come. One thing that community land trusts do is they secure land and remove it from speculation. And so the land is always there. I mean, trusting that you don't have a major earthquake that splits it apart or whatever. But anyway, the land is always there. So what we've done on Lopez is we've married the concept of community land trusts, which is held by a nonprofit. We have, you know, we set ourselves up to say that we are going to steward the land for a minimum of 200 years. So that's the way that we think about it. And that the land is always there. It's held for community uses. In our case, we hold it for affordable housing, sustainable agriculture, development of co-ops and cottage industries. In other words, the land is held in trust in service of community needs. And so that's our beginning. And then what happens on the land, you know, it's a layered effect. In our case, we do a lot of housing co-ops. And I know, you know, a lot of people talk about tiny houses now. We have been building small houses. We didn't know they were called tiny houses, but it has been a comfortable way for people, an attractive way for people in the last 32 years we've been developing. Our houses range from about 400 square feet to 1,300 square feet. We always tend to build a little bit on the smaller side because that's what we can afford to do. And we marry this idea of community land trusts, and then we lease the land for 198 years to a housing co-op. And a housing co-op is a group of people, they come together. Let's say that you have a mobile home park, and the community land trust would own that land and lease it to the mobile home park, and the mobile home park could become a cooperative. So instead of having individual leases on the land, the co-op would lease the land. So there would be the organization that's holding the land in trust, that's the community land trust. And then you would have a housing co-op. And that housing co-op is based on members only. So if you are living in your house full-time, you are a member of that co-op, and each member has, you know, one share in the co-op. And the co-op is a democratically run organization, and they interact with the community land trust. And typically what happens is the co-op takes out a joint mortgage, and everyone is paying on that mortgage. So the individuals don't necessarily own their own home, but they have access to a proprietary lease, which gives them some ownership rights on it. So there are, on community land trusts, you will often find that there are, in the United States, more fee simple ownership relationships. So the community land trust owns the land. And in the case of a mobile home park, maybe they're not a co-op, maybe just each individual family comes in and they have a proprietary lease with the community land trust. It says they have a 198-year lease. They can pass their mobile home on to the next person, however that is going to work. So there is, I think, one thing about community land trusts is they are a flexible tool. And again, community land trusts organize around holding land in trust for community uses. So if a group were to come to you as a community land trust and say, we've been looking at this land, we certainly don't have the wherewithal to purchase it, but we do have the wherewithal to come up with the money to purchase our own homes or to, set up, an RV park or whatever it is. The community land trust, structured as a nonprofit 501c3, can raise the money or be gifted, the land and purchase the property and then make it available and put into the terms of the lease how that land will be used. One thing I like to tell communities is as you develop a community land trust and really experience the value of long-term use of land by the community, and you stop displacement because land is often especially along the West Coast, land is highly, highly valued. And so it is often leaving the marketplace that's serving, say, a group of lower income people because there's more value in it to sell it to the highest bidder. In a community land trust, that land stays forever in service of the community, many of whom are in lower income groups. And so having a community land trust, then you can model a housing co-op, a mobile home park, apartments, rental, ownership, shared equity housing. In other words, it's an extremely, extremely flexible model and something that can serve the community long-term. So long after we are all gone, that land will still be there. It will still be stewarded in service of the community. So that is essentially how a community land trust operates. I've given Caden some information, and if you want to dig into how a community land trust is structured, I'm happy to answer any questions about it, but I think, the technical aspects of it are probably not worth your going into at this point. The most important thing is to understand with community land trusts, they are democratically run organizations, and they are there and existing to hold land in trust in service of community. I just can't state that, I think, often enough as to how a community stabilizes if land is available in service of community for such things as affordable housing, food security, cottage industries, co-ops, small businesses, whatever it is that you're needing. You all are going through, I think, a tremendously stressful time because, the fire and so much loss of actual physical structures. A lot of times a community land trust may be operating in a community where maybe they can purchase properties that already have some buildings on it, but you are going to be, it sounds like, starting from the ground up because you lost over 2,400 units. So as I said, there's community land trust, and then there are housing co-ops. A little bit more about housing co-ops is that co-ops tend to be such that they are, they're easier for those who are of lower income to buy into and to maintain. We do all of ours as limited equity co-ops. So people may come in and they may put in $2,500 in sweat equity and maybe $2,500 in cash, and that would be their share value. So all co-ops have the option of being, either limited equity or shared equity, or just really just a full equity co-op. I'm reading a question here. Does it introduce risk abolishing CLT, returning land to the owners? Okay, I'll get to that. But anyway, there are several ways that you can do a co-op. We tend to do limited equity co-ops because we are trying to model a form of housing that can continuously serve those that are typically locked out of the marketplace. So if the first buyer comes in at, say, $5,000, we then say their share value is worth $5,000, and we allow a 3% simple interest on that annually. So yes, they're only getting $150 in that interest, but what they are getting is probably the way we set up our housing is they're paying about 50% of market value for their housing. So we've often told people in a community land trust with working beside a co-op is that we raise the funds for the land, and we raise almost 50% of all the funds needed to construct the housing. And that leaves the co-op member with purchasing about 50% of that value through a mortgage is really what they do. So let's say that you have a $200,000 house, they would be taking out a $100,000 mortgage. And the houses that we're just finishing up now, everyone will have a $400 mortgage payment. And then on top of that, they'll have utilities. And I'll get to some of the, how we deal with net zero to hold the utilities in line. But so they've got that $400 payment. And what we found over time is that because co-ops are a form of ownership, and we do not have to do income verification every year, people, when they buy into the co-op, and let's say that they are, making $1,200 a month, 30% of their income is approximately $400, they qualify. But as their housing stabilizes, they tend, what we've seen work anyway, is that they tend to make more income. Nothing destabilizes a family more, I think, than having to move. At least up here, people are oftentimes moving 2 and 3 times a year because we're in a heavily tourist economy, and rental housing is extremely rare. I'm not quite sure how yours would work, but what we've seen is that it stabilizes people. They're able to make a little bit more money, and therefore put more aside in savings. Because one thing a limited equity co-op will not give you is a lot of built up equity in your share. Okay, so that is something, and I tell people that every time when they apply. If you are looking to build equity, you should look for an organization, a program that actually has either a shared equity program or no limit on the equity, because you'll never be able to take equity out of the house. We have limited equity co-ops combined with co-ops really err on the side of long-term affordability. And in a place like Lopez, where when we began, housing prices jumped 190% in 1 year, and they've never really gone down. We have the lowest wages in the state. It is essential for us that we provide permanently affordable access to housing. But in Eastern Washington, I know that a lot of times what they'll do is that they will set up programs, whether they are co-ops or not, and they will set up the equity different than an extremely limited equity, because they want people to be able to establish equity in their housing. And maybe the marketplace is such that, you know, you can still find, say, the next tier of housing for that group. We have, yes, AMI requirement for buyers. Yes, so everyone that we serve is typically at 80% area median income or below. But our typical housing, we find on average, we serve about 65% AMI. That's really who we're serving. And one reaction we've gotten from people is, hey, sometimes, you know, people get better jobs, they earn more money, they're really not considered to be 80% and below area median income. Our response is that we actually don't create housing to keep people in poverty. We create a housing like this with a long-term relationship, you know, with being affordable, because we're trying to stabilize our community and we're not trying to penalize people for making more money. There is with the Community Land Trust, there's a tripartite board. So 1/3 of the Community Land Trust board is typically made up of people that represent the public. Maybe they are realtors, or a public interest. Maybe it's somebody on the bank, someone that owns a business. 1/3 of the people are made up of members, people that are just supporting the, you know, regular folk. They're supporting, they don't need housing necessarily, but they're just supporting the concept. And then 1/3 of the people on the board are made up of leaseholders, people that either are leasing or want to lease from the Community Land Trust. And so you've got this built-in relationship / tension on the board, you know, of how are you going to balance out these issues? There's a question here that says, if a CLT is established and houses are owned in fee simple, does that introduce the risk of future owners abolishing the CLT? The thing is, the CLT is its own 501c3 and it is a separate entity. There is an established ground lease. Like, let's say that you have a co-op or a fee simple arrangement. The CLT owns the land, and in that establishes a ground lease. So this is usually, you know, typically a 30-40 page agreement. It establishes what the terms are, what the payments are, how the land is to be used, and that it is always to be used for affordable housing. And so even if, let's say, a group of 50 fee simple ownership homes was established, and they all had their homes, their fee simple homes, on Community Land Trust land, and next door to them there was a 50-unit co-op. Neither the co-op or the fee simple homeowners would ever be able to remove the Community Land Trust structure. That is a separate nonprofit. Even though it has representation from leaseholders, it is not a majority of leaseholders on it. And the bylaws of the Community Land Trust say that if it were to you know, cease to exist, it would have to find another Community Land Trust or like-minded organization, you know, to take all of its assets. So I don't think, I've never heard of a, there have been some Community Land Trusts that have failed, but I've never heard of one of them being, you know, taken over in a hostile takeover from the owners that are there. There's another question here is, yes, the CLT is irrevocable. It's in perpetuity. You know, the US laws say that you can only have 99-year leases, so nothing can really be in perpetuity. But for 198 years, the Community Land Trust can give leases and then renew them one time. So the Community Land Trust needs to, from the very get-go, establish itself as an entity that's going to be around for a very, very long time. And that changes the way that people think about it. It changes the way you steward it. It changes the way I think you set up your finances, because you realize you're not just a developer that comes in and then is gone once the houses are occupied. You're planning to be around for a very long time. And so as you get more familiar with community land trusts and how they've established themselves, you can begin to see how people set up their books, how they set up their stewardship programs, and all of that. Somebody asked the question, are they democratically run? Would it be majority vote or consensus? Community land trusts all set themselves up differently, right? You have to establish that in your bylaws and articles. I have known community land trusts, some of them set themselves up for consensus. The study that I've done on consensus decision-making is that if you have, say, an underlying belief system, like sometimes you'll see maybe religious organizations, Quakers, for instance, they will often set them up as consensus decision-making. But when you know, community land trusts are sort of dynamic, our neighboring community land trusts set themselves up as consensus. Ours on Lopez, we set ourselves up as democratically with a majority rule. And it's interesting, but almost all of our decisions since forever, for 32 years, have always been consensus. But we did not want to be bound by that. I think because so many of us have had, we have had experiences where consensus was used as a power ploy, and it was uncomfortable to us. So we always say we strive for consensus, but our fallback is really democratically run. And yeah, some of you probably know much more about consensus and democratic decision making than I do. And I'm sure whoever sets up the Community Land Trust will do a fantastic job. You know, some of it's trial and error. You realize after you've been around 32 years, it's like human beings, kind of nothing surprises you anymore. And lots of things can happen. We had a situation probably about 15 years or so. We were only about 17 years into our existence, and there was a group of people managing the Community Land Trust for a while, and they were good people, but they really didn't know how to manage it, and they took it to the brink of bankruptcy. And one thing they wanted to do and thought about doing is maybe selling the land. Ooh, that's just a big no-no. Well, it didn't happen. And I think, you know, one of the beauties of having a community land trust and having it be democratic controlled and having a tripartite board where you've got, you know, 1/3 representing public, 1/3 the members, and 1/3 leaseholders, is that we were able to bring in so many people who, you know, your whole theme is neighbors helping neighbors. Well, that's exactly what happened. You know, the land trust was in trouble, and so many people came to the table to save it from going under. I think that's, you know, it almost got leaned. No, the land, it's forbidden to be leaned. It never even got to that. We just cleaned it up. But let me see, if you want to receive, so the board was able to pledge the land as collateral and it almost got liened. Actually, yes, as a community land trust, you can put up, and actually most banks require you to put up the land as collateral. And that is, well, we should talk about that in greater detail. We've never had any default of any kind in the housing units themselves. And the trouble that the community land trust got into wasn't big enough to really put it at risk. I don't even know why I'm bringing this up, except to tell you that, you know, working with affordable housing, working with land, working with housing, working with people, all of it is fraught with complexity. And I think that when you establish your organization and the structure on which you want your organization to operate, it's best to think of all of the possible scenarios that human beings can think of, because sooner or later, it seems like something can go wrong. And what you want is this incredible safety net. And going back again to the power of community land trusts and what the safety net is and why I like them so much is the land is really held in trust. And when things inevitably happen, which they do, whether human caused or happening because of human activity and, you know, pressure on the natural environment, the land is there to support us. And by having a membership and a democratically controlled membership organization and operating it that way, I think if there are bumps along the way, you can always hold it and bring it back into its original purpose. It's actually a flexible model. It can serve the community really well. You know, and I think once people understand how a community land trust operates, like there are so many of them in the United States. I think the city of Houston created the community land trust. The city, you know, created it. A lot of community land trusts are just created by people in the community. And depending on how it is, whether it's municipal run or whether it's community-based run, I prefer community-based organizations because I think that they are more able to sustain themselves long-term. You know, they're a private organization and they are being operated by this tripartite board. And when and if issues come up, they can be fairly, I think, negotiated, and you establish relationship with people. And as we all know, relationships are extremely, extremely powerful. And I would say in some ways, they are the most powerful asset any community has, are the relationships. They can, yeah, they take us through, well, you know, you guys are experiencing it. I don't really have anything that I can say that about that in terms of how strong it is. There's a question here about farm worker housing on community land trust land. And again, I just want to state that land trusts are about holding land and community. If there is a need for farm worker housing, a need for rental housing, a need for fee simple ownership housing, a need for co-op housing, a need for RV parks or mobile home parks, the community land trust model is flexible enough that any one or all of those purposes can be served by it. There is not really any need to distinguish, you know, how the land can be used, except what is in the greatest service of your community, and where the land lies, and what it isn't in an appropriate place for farm workers or renters, or whatever that is. But that would be for your land development committee to figure some of that out. Yeah, what else? Don't know. It's been an incredible 32 years watching what this has done for our community. We have about 10% of our housing is rental, the rest is in co-ops. And whether in rentals or in co-ops, just having safe, secure, equitable housing available in a community, it's done wonders, not just for the adults, but for the kids that live there. And part of what's been, I think, important for us, and part of what we started to do, is that we started building net zero because we realized that even though people got into housing and we had, say, reasonable mortgage interest, the principal interest, insurance, those were reasonable payments. Energy costs could not really be controlled so much, because you can't control that kind of a market. So what we started doing is building net zero and achieving about 50% of all of our reduction of energy per house came through just passive measures. So we just used passive solar measures. The other 50% we had to be a little bit more aggressive with, and including putting solar panels on. But getting people to net zero meant that they were no longer having to pay a monthly expense for their energy use. And of course, not everybody lives within the energy budget that their solar panels provide, or that they get reduced through passive measures. But it's another thing where they then, as the homeowner, as the renter, they have some opportunity to control how much they spend. If they want to live within an energy budget, put on a sweater or dry your clothes outside, or whatever, you have more control over that. And it's kind of fun. The kids, for a while, they were the ones that went out, and checked all the meters and reported back. It became, a little bit of a friendly competition. Not everyone wanted to play. Some people don't like competition, but anyway, it was kind of fun to watch people interact with their energy and their water use. We introduced a lot of rainwater catchment. We have this thing. We live on this island, and for about 4 months out of the year, we really don't get any water. And so we've got this thing about a lot of storage of rainwater. We store it in ponds, we store it in tanks. Some we use for flushing toilets and washing clothes, some we use for irrigation, and some we just like to have around in case we need it for something. So we've got, potable water systems as well. But we also have a lot of rainwater storage. And yeah, again, I just want to emphasize, I think it's an extremely flexible model. Whether you use co-ops or, another type of housing, I don't really think that matters as much. We chose co-ops because most of the people we serve are not bankable. They could not get individual loans. And it's not because they particularly were poor with money, but some of them live in a cash economy. Some just never established credit. They don't use credit cards. Some work multiple jobs, but none of them look very secure. We're on a small island. There's only 2,400 people. We usually, we ask people for references. And we've never had a default in 32 years. So we can pretty much tell, even though somebody doesn't have a credit history, that they are going to, be good on their word and pay all their payments. And co-ops were one way See, we didn't want to be landlords in the sense of traditional landlords. We wanted to establish co-ops so that it's a hybrid between a rental and an ownership. But we wanted to establish that people had more, they just had more of a relationship to controlling, you know, their own housing, their own repairs, all of that. And again, they couldn't qualify, you know, through the bank. So our community pretty much dictated to us that co-ops were a good solution for us. Let me see. Oh, somebody wrote, due to complexity and degree of the learning curve for everybody, it seems there must be a minimum size of a CLT in co-ops to be stable and successful for 200 years. For example, an ordinary homeowner can't really establish a CLT for a house with 2 ADUs. Well, see, that's so interesting. They did a study a while back because basically everyone said to us, you're too small to be successful. And what we really realized is that you're not really too small to be successful. In the case where an ordinary homeowner establishing a CLT, a co-op, et cetera, for a house with 2 ADUs, I would say, yeah, chances are that might not survive for 200 years because if it were in isolation like that. But what we've done now, you know, we've got on this small island, we have about 6 different co-ops. And even though some of the co-ops only have 4 units in them, what we find is that there's great power in having one CLT, like in the instance where maybe a home owner with 2 ADUs established a co-op and the land was part of a larger CLT that held, maybe they're going to hold, you know, 40, 50 different, have land holdings in 40, 50 different locations. And that would just be one co-op of many operating on CLT land. And I think that's where you began to see the power of how it works. I think anything done in isolation, because there's so few people involved and people, human beings tend to be very emotional, especially around home. You can destroy things through that emotional attachment sometimes. Whereas a CLT run by a tripartite board, maybe they're managing, you know, 40, 50 different CLT properties, some are co-ops, some are not, etc. When issues come up, right, that is the solution, I think, to longevity, is that it becomes like any other part of our culture. The more established it is, it's like operating a small business. If you're the only small business in a town, you might have, you know, more of an issue. But if you've got, you know, 40, 50 small businesses and they come together and share information and start their own little chamber and do things like that, there's more power, more strength in it. None of this is without a great deal of oh, I don't know. You certainly have to develop a skill set in order to do it, because you're dealing with real estate, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with finance. So somebody said, can you describe the process of building and creating neighborhoods? I'll just describe how we do it. So we either purchase or we are gifted land. That's really been the only 2 ways we've gotten land. We're just now talking with the county about being maybe having a bargain sale on some land, but that's never really gone through. So right now we either purchase it on the open market. Oftentimes we find a friendly buyer who maybe wants to give a bargain sale, or somebody decides to gift us some land. And the first thing we do in that situation, of course, is we have to figure out all the infrastructure. Where's the water? Where's the sewer? Where are the roads going to go? And then get an overall design for the property. Then after we've got that and we are fairly sure that we are going to be 100% successful in being able to develop the property, that there's no booby traps, you know how that is sometimes with land, the whole thing can kind of blow up on you. So once we establish that, then we actually go out and we do an application process. And we advertise what we're doing. If we're doing 11 houses and they are going to be net zero, and there's going to be some 3-bedroom, some 2-bedroom, some 1-bedroom, we describe all of that. We open up an application process and we say, you know, we're serving people, average is going to be 66% of area median income, but we can serve up to 80. And we can, because we've established some programs, we can serve as low as 34% of area median income. So we establish that range, we advertise, we try and put all of our advertising in English and in Spanish so that we can, you know, get a fair cross section of the community. And then we ask people, we send them the information and we ask them to do a self-assessment. You know, how are you doing with your credit history? How are you doing with your debt? You know, things like that. This is probably, we do this almost a year before we ever start to build. And that gives us time to actually work with people, get them to understand what a housing co-op is. If they need to build their credit, it gives them time to do that. If they've got anything in their application that needs to be taken care of, it gives them time to do that. And then we say, we are, you know, got the design plans and all of that. We tweak them a little based on households. And if somebody, say they need some, you know, they have a disability of some sort and they need some design changes for that, or they've find out, you know, someone's pregnant and they need an extra room, whatever. So we settle all of that out. And then we submit for our building permits, we get all of that. And then we require sweat equity. And people always say, why do you do that? It's too time consuming and everybody's working. But the reason we do is that we live in a rural place, people have low income, and we found in these last 32 years, it is so much better if people have some skill set around taking care of their own housing. So they help build the houses, and then they build up some of their what's called sweat equity, so they don't have to just put in cash and that. And so everybody is building together. We used to require 24 hours. Now we're down to, you know, about somewhere between, maybe about 16 hours a week. And half of that can be done through friends and family. So if somebody really only has a Saturday to give, you know, if they work the other 5 days, then that's all they do. What we found over the last 3 decades is that people are working more. They have really less free time than they used to have. And so we can't require as much from them now in the building process. So we all build together. We're our own contractor, but we hire a lot of subs and some staff to be on the site and help teach the different homeowners. We also invite interns to come in and help. We don't do that during COVID, of course. And it is really empowering. You know, the first time someone learns really to use, you know, a table saw, chop saw, they help pour their foundation. They, you know, the most exciting thing, you know, is people love to do their finishes, but it's really incredible for them. And yeah, so everybody is getting to know each other while they're building. And that to me has been almost the strongest aspect of building good co-ops, is having everyone build together. Some people don't do the building process and they come in later. And so we encourage work parties, because working together and I know that's your theme, you know, is neighbors helping neighbors. It builds a relationship that is outside of just this mind that, you know, how we can get with thinking everybody is, you know, maybe not our cup of tea. Yeah. Let's see, are there other organizations that you're aware of on the West Coast that operate in similar ways that we'd be looking into? Yes, if you go onto, I believe it's the Grounded Solutions site, there are about 250 community land trusts operating in the United States, and there are Proud Ground is in Portland, Oregon. They're a very competent community land trust, and I would encourage you to speak with community land trusts in Oregon, because all of our laws are, you know, slightly different when it comes to you know, some of the particulars of what you put into a ground lease. Yeah. So do you have any properties off island? Suppose I transfer to a big local CLT like Square One and then retain a life estate. How do all these smaller one house properties maintain level of community necessary for the hard work and working together? Oh yeah, lots of different ways. Our service area, according to the IRS, what we've established is only on Lopez Island. So that is our established service area for our 501c3. A community land trust, every community land trust establishes a service area. If it's 4 cities within a county, a whole county, a city, you know, that's up to you. You have to measure. Right now, we're working with a new community land trust that is spanning 2 counties, and you know that has its challenges, but they're rural, so you know it makes some sense. But you just have to be prepared to deal with it. And I think that how one house properties maintain the level of community is you have to find ways to invite each other to events. Like, you know, we own a couple of farms, and once or twice a year, we'll invite everyone, you know, for an event at the farm. That builds relationship. Or, you know, if people need to hire somebody from one of the housing co-ops, that builds relationships. You have annual meetings, annual events. We have a big, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we have big harvest dinners. So it's once a year, a few hundred people get together, and we have a big celebration of all the harvest foods. And that binds people together. You know, I think you guys are probably familiar with how to build community and what makes it. But you do have to work on it and create opportunities. Like all co-ops have at least an annual meeting. One thing we've noticed, some of the strongest co-ops, they also just get together and they have a barbecue once, you know, where they don't do any business. They just meet together, or they'll have work parties several times a year, and they won't do any business. So they'll just work together or meet together. Is it possible to establish hardwiring internet, which some of us are sensitive to? Yeah, in the communities that we do, we have fiber available. So that is what we prefer to give to everyone. Some people will want to have Wi-Fi within their house, but we do all of ours because it's available. We wouldn't do it if it you know, were too expensive, but basically for $1,500 dollars, you can hook up to fiber within our area. How were house designs selected and created? Oh, we tend to do design charrettes. Some of them will last for 3 days, which sounds ridiculous, but there's a lot to talk about in house design. And so we invite designers and, you know, folks from the sewer district, water district, et cetera, and people who are going to live there. And we design, yeah, we just do big design charrettes and try and get, you know, our goals set and then just work through all the design issues. It's very fun. And then what's the cheapest house we've ever built? Well, before there were lots and lots of layered codes, which now we have. Our cheapest house we ever built was in the beginning, when we built 7 houses, each for about $70,000. Now it costs us $70,000 just to put the infrastructure in. So I don't know if you're just talking about money. It's really difficult and challenging now. You know, we thought we would save money by building straw bale. Yeah, maybe we saved a little money, but it's so labor intensive. We had 60 interns come to help us build them, and there was a lot to manage with it. I think if you want to save money, you know, you have to consider labor is about half the cost of a house, and hiring people's the other half. But it's not just a matter of getting people onto the site. You know, somebody has to be very willing to work with people, be super respectful of them not having any skill when they come. It's got to be very well organized. But if you want to save money, saving on labor is really, really, I think, one thing you can do. And you can also try, you know, as much as you can, meet, you know, as many people as you can, and, you know, find deals on lumber. You know, we've been building the last 7 months during the pandemic, and lumber went up 120%, basically, just in our build time. We've never experienced anything like that. And anyone who's building now will find that, you know, it's COVID related, but it's also fire related. There's just a lot of demand for supplies.